There are bad cafes. There are very bad cafes. And then there is the Soggy Biscuit. This wasn't just a bad cafe. Oh no. It was the worst cafe in the entire history of the world, probably in the whole universe. If aliens landed on Earth and their first stop was the Soggy Biscuit, they would get back in their spaceship and fly away forever. They would probably put up a massive sign in space saying, "Beware of Earth, contains soggy biscuits." It was that dreadful. The cafe was famous for being terrible. People didn't go there for a nice cup of tea. They went there on a dare. From the outside, it looked sad. The paint was peeling off the walls like sunburnt skin. The sign, which once proudly said the Soggy Biscuit, now read, "T.E. Sogai B. Skeet." A single lonely plastic plant sat in the window. It had died, which is quite difficult for a plastic plant to do. But the real horror began when you opened the door. A little bell was supposed to jingle. It didn't. It just made a sad little clunk sound as if it had given up on life. The smell that hit you was a mixture of burnt toast, old socks, and something that might have been a long-forgotten cabbage. It was a smell so powerful it could knock a pigeon out of the sky. Once your eyes stopped watering from the smell, you could take in the decor. The walls were painted a color that could only be described as unhappy yellow. Hanging on them were paintings. Not nice paintings of flowers or landscapes. No, these were paintings of sad-looking clowns crying into their soup. The chairs were a special kind of torture. They were made of hard, lumpy plastic and designed so that no human could ever sit comfortably. They wobbled. They creaked. One leg was always shorter than the others, turning your meal into a balancing act. It was like sitting on a grumpy, three-legged badger. And then there were the staff. Staff? That's a generous word. There was one waiter. His name was Barry. Barry was usually asleep. Not just dozing, but properly, deeply asleep, with his head on the counter and a little puddle of drool forming next to him. To get his attention, you had to shout, "Barry!" you would yell. He would jolt awake, look at you with the confused eyes of a hibernating bear, and grunt. "What?" he would ask, as if you were the one being rude for waking him up from his very important nap. Service didn't come with a smile here. It came with a sigh. Eventually, Barry would slump over to your table. He wouldn't give you a menu, he would just throw it. A single, sticky piece of cardboard would land on your table with a wet thwack. The menu itself was a masterpiece of disaster. It was covered in stains of brown, red, and a mysterious shade of green. The writing was so messy it looked like a spider had fallen into an ink pot and then had a panic attack all over the page. You had to guess what the words said. Chaco KN. SP might be chicken soup, or it might be choking on soap. It was a risky game. The drinks menu was even more terrifying. You could order tea. It was just called tea. When you asked what kind of tea, Barry would just stare at you until you felt silly. The tea, when it arrived, was a pale, watery liquid that tasted faintly of disappointment. The coffee was worse. It was called Barry's Special Brew. It was black, sludgy, and had the texture of mud. It was rumored that Barry just boiled an old leather shoe to make it. And don't even think about asking for a cold drink. The fresh orange juice was a warm, yellowy substance with bits floating in it. They were probably not bits of orange. The food options were legendary. The signature dish was, of course, the Soggy Biscuit. It wasn't a side dish. It was a main course. It was one giant, pale biscuit floating in a bowl of lukewarm gray water. It looked like a sad, deflated jellyfish. Then there was the mystery meat pie. What was the mystery? No one knew, not even Barry. He once told a customer it was probably some sort of animal. The pie crust was so hard you could use it to hammer in a nail. The filling was a lumpy gray goo that wiggled slightly if you poked it. For dessert, your only option was cake of the day. The cake was the same every day. It was a dry, crumbly sponge that had been sitting on the counter for what looked like several years. It was decorated with what might have been icing at one point, but was now a hard, cracked shell, like ancient cement. A single, sad-looking candle was often stuck in the top, even when it wasn't anyone's birthday. Trying to cut a slice was impossible. The knife would just bounce off. It was less of a cake and more of a fossil. I decided to be brave. I was on a dare, after all. My friends had promised me a whole 10 pounds if I ate a full meal at the Soggy Biscuit. So I ordered. "One mystery meat pie, please, Barry," I said, trying to sound confident. Barry grunted and shuffled off to the kitchen. I heard a series of loud bangs, a microwave ding, and then a faint splash. A few minutes later, he returned, holding a plate. The pie looked even worse up close. It had a strange sheen to it, and a single, lonely pea was balanced on top like a tiny green mountain on a planet of gray sludge. I took my fork and tried to pierce the crust. The fork bent. It actually bent into a U shape. I tried again with my knife, putting all my weight on it. With a loud crack, the crust broke, sending a spray of hot gray goo all over my shirt. It smelled like an old shoe that had been left in a puddle. I took a tiny bite. It was a mistake. A huge mistake. The taste was indescribable. It was chewy and lumpy and tasted of despair. I quickly took a sip of my tea to wash it down. The tea tasted even worse. How was that even possible? Needing to escape the horror on my plate, I decided to visit the toilets. This was my second mistake. The sign on the door was a drawing of a person who looked very, very unwell. That should have been a warning. I pushed the door open and was hit by a smell 100 times worse than the cafe. The floor was sticky. The single light bulb flickered, casting spooky shadows. There was no toilet paper. Instead, there was a single old newspaper from 1987. The sink was full of a dark, murky water, and the tap just dripped sadly, making a plink, plonk sound that echoed the cries of my soul. I stumbled back to my table, defeated. I couldn't eat the pie. I couldn't drink the tea. I couldn't even use the toilet. My friends were peering through the window, laughing their heads off. I had failed the dare. I slumped in my wobbly chair, surrounded by the smell of burnt cabbage and the sight of crying clowns. Barry was asleep again, snoring loudly this time. The soggy biscuit had beaten me. It was a true champion of terribleness, a king of catastrophe, a prince of putrid. It was, without a doubt, the worst place on earth. As I sat there, wallowing in my failure, a woman in a smart business suit walked in. She looked completely out of place. She wore shiny shoes and carried a clipboard. She marched right up to the counter and banged on it. "Barry!" she yelled. Barry woke up with a snort. "What?" he grumbled. "It's the end of the month, Barry," she said, looking at her clipboard. "Let's see the numbers." I was confused. What numbers? The number of customers who ran away screaming? The number of forks bent on the pies? Barry pulled a big, heavy book from under the counter. He opened it up. The woman looked at it, her pen tapping away. Yes, she said. "Bookings are up 20% this month. The worst cafe in the world experience package is selling out every weekend. The online reviews are fantastic. Everyone says it's hilariously awful. One blogger called the mystery meat pie a life-changingly bad experience. Excellent work, Barry. Your bonus will be significant this month." She snapped the book shut and smiled. Barry actually smiled back. It was a terrifying sight. My jaw dropped to the sticky floor. It was all an act. The whole thing. The terrible smell, the wobbly chairs, the inedible food, the sleeping waiter. It was all a brilliant, elaborate performance. The Soggy Biscuit wasn't a failed cafe. It was a massively successful business. People weren't coming here by accident. They were booking tickets, paying money to experience the disaster. They were coming for the story, for the dare, for the sheer fun of surviving the worst cafe in the world. It was an attraction, like a theme park of terrible food. I finally understood. The lesson wasn't about avoiding bad cafes. The lesson was that if you are going to be bad, be the absolute best at being bad. The Soggy Biscuit wasn't just bad. It was epically, wonderfully, unforgettably bad. And people loved it. As I left, I saw a new family coming in, their faces a mixture of fear and excitement. I passed my friends outside. "You failed," they jeered. I just smiled. I didn't get their 10 pounds, but I had discovered the secret of the Soggy Biscuit. And that I realized was priceless. The place was genius. Absolutely disgusting, but genius.